Well, so glad that you're here tonight, and I think we're going to have our third storm in a row later on. So apparently, we did get the lumber in. We're going to start building the ark next week. So if you want to come join us, but kind of an inside joke for those of you watching online. I had a woman write me this week. She's from England, and she's watching. Let's just give her a hand, hey? Across the pond over there. So. And we have some people from Australia and others, but it's just really exciting to see people, from around the country and that watching in on this. We have 2 more weeks, tonight and next week, and I'm really excited about that. Tonight we're going to be going over, the rudiments, and then in a couple weeks we'll take a week off, and then we're going to start the year-long program. For every lesson we've done here, I have about 4 others, so if we get into more detail, you'll find that this stuff is caught more than it's taught. You need to hear it over and over again. It's like anything else. And to apply these things, you need to know how, but then you need to do it. And so by coming every week, there's a constant reminder of, and it's a recalibration. When you go sailing, and even in going to the moon in a rocket, it's not always a straight trajectory. Now, if you got a power boat, it's got enough engine power, you can kind of aim across the lake and get there pretty well. But if you're in a sailboat, it sits kind of on the water a little more, and it's subject to the wind. And so what you find you're doing is constantly recorrecting your course. You're constantly recorrecting your course to get to where you want to go. And that's kind of what this class is. When we take the year-long class, we're constantly recorrecting our course. We're trying, the objective, to be emotionally resilient. We're trying to build up the capacity, but we get off course a little bit, right? We maybe have a flare-up, or we have an issue, or we're thinking something, we get down, whatever. Okay, let's recorrect and get back on. And then maybe we're going this way a little bit. So I look at the year-long program as just constant recorrection. It's sailing for the soul, you might say. And that's life. And it's you got to look at it. What else do I got to do on Tuesday nights, right? And it's right in, perfect timing where you can have the rest of the week and you just come off the weekend. So think about that, and think about some friends that you'd like to invite. They can come anytime, but we're going to start it in a couple weeks here, and I'll get you more information. We're also going to be doing a 9 to 3 o'clock program on a Saturday, and I have to get permission on what date, so I'll tell you more of that next week. But we're going to do it just for a practicum. It's going to be a workshop on the emotional regulation, the breathing and all that, and some of the things. I'll tell you about it at the end of the hour here a little bit more. So if you want to be part of that, it'll be hands-on, where we can really see how we're doing these kind of things, all right? So some exciting things going on. Well, tonight we want to talk about anxiety, lesson number 12, emotional relearning. So let's just ask God to speak to our hearts and invite Him to just really move in us. So, Father, I thank you, Lord. You know all about us. You know who we are. Lord, as we talk about our past and our present and our future, you know all about that. Father, you know us by name. You know our past. You know all the things that we're thinking. And I pray, Lord, that through the power of your Holy Spirit, that you would move in us, that you would change us, you would give us the hope and the joy and the confidence, all those things we need to be resilient. So as we talk this week and next week about relearning emotionally the truth about who we are, I pray that for each one of us it would be personal. For each one of us, it would be an application that we need. And so we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. As I studied and taught and wrote about emotional resilience, it soon became apparent that we're dealing with learned behavior. The standard approach to emotional healing for many, many years now has been cognitive behavioral therapy. It's cognitive in nature. We've been taught that when we have a wrong notion about ourselves, what we need to do is learn what's true, and that should correct it. But as we've studied more and more, we know that it's not always the case. You can know something here, but not know it here. And knowing it here is what moves us. And it's what we know here in our heart that causes a lot of the problems and can be also the solution. So it didn't take long for me to think, well, gee, this is kind of emotionally learning. And the example I use a lot, and that came to me years ago when we did this, was a woman that felt that she was ugly, really felt she was ugly, but she wasn't. She wasn't ugly at all. And yet trying to convince her of that, you wouldn't get anywhere. Somewhere emotionally, she learned that. And having counseled many people, I know how it can happen. I know how emotionally, having had horrible hair when I grew up, I remember the hair I did have. I had 2 colics, whatever that was. I never got an award for it, but anyways, I remember my mom trying to get that colic down and everything, and your hair. And I remember feeling very conscious. I don't think she meant to make me feel that way, but I was kind of glad when I became bald. I didn't have to deal with that, I tried to do one of those waterfalls, it just fell, and so it really didn't work out that good. But I remember her comments making me feel self-conscious. Here again, I'm not blaming Mom, I'm not saying she did it on purpose, but this is how, I'm reading a book on shame right now, and especially for women. It's written by a woman and talking a lot about the studies she's done with women. The body image is so powerful in this country, and it's all around us. And so it's easy to get these emotional beliefs about ourselves. And so we want to know how to correct those, okay? And so it's about the lies, and here's the key, that make us feel unsafe. If you're with a bunch of people and you all have the same problem, and this is what can get rid of shame sometimes, is when shame a lot of times, and I know we're talking about anxiety, but there's a correlation sometimes. Shame a lot of times is so powerful because we think we're the only one. But when we get to a group and we find out that many, many, many others are suffering the same way, somehow there's some relief a little bit. We still have to wrestle with our thoughts. We still have to wrestle, but sometimes we can get to that point of where we feel we're good enough when we know that maybe this is coming from somewhere else. It just isn't about me. If this many people are hurting, maybe there's something going on here. And the trouble is when we feel that we're unacceptable, when we feel shame or something like that, we feel unsafe. And a lot of the anxiety is happening because we feel unsafe. And so safety is really key. And when we talk about this, tonight, we're going to be talking about that quite a few things. And you need to ask yourself, what does it feel like to be unsafe? Now, it doesn't have to be horrifying, but it can still be that triggers on. And so I want you to kind of put in the back of my mind safety. Just kind of think a little bit of that tonight as we're sharing, okay? So I realized that a lot of this came from trauma or reinforced emotionally, tied into our amygdala alarm system, and we'll talk all about that. Well, the amygdala is the part of the brain, and we talked about the brain earlier in the class. It's in the Olympic Emotional Center, and it's what we call like the guard shack. It's there to protect us. It looks for things that might harm us and alarms us then if it's there. It perceives danger because of the past, past trauma-based learning. It hijacks the brain, puts us into fight, flight, and freeze, and we talked about that some last week. Unlike logical left brain learning, trauma-based learning is right-brained, and logic doesn't always solve the problem. We can't always logically, and that's what we try to do sometimes. We try to comfort someone and we say logic. My dad said there was no monster in the basement. He took me down there, held me by the hand, and my logic said, well, yeah, they're not going to come out when you're here, And so, the logic didn't work too well. I still feared the monster in the basement that hid when my dad came down, right? Well, there was no logic to that. It was a childish belief based on some experience. And it took a while for me. Now, if that was the only thing, but I had quite a few of these. For some reason, I had a lot of those kinds of fears, and I had to learn to overcome one after another. And having done that, it gave me more courage to tackle bigger and bigger things. But I learned somewhere emotionally, okay? And that's the key. And the good news is this program is based on emotional relearning. We can relearn. We can relearn emotionally the truth of who we are. We can learn it in our heart. We can start to believe. When I went from a place where I felt I was unlovable to a place where I'm really starting to feel that I'm lovable, that's an emotional learning. That didn't come overnight. I knew it, and I had to think about it and work on it and talk to the Lord about it, and started to appreciate and learn more and more about that. And so it can be changed as we learn the truth emotionally, and we're going to get into that more next week. Next week we're going to go more into that. Well, the trouble is that the lies that we believe about ourselves, and this is where a lot of the things come, and we'll go over some of them in a few minutes, they are emotionally believed, and they're learned, and they feel true. They feel true in our gut. A lot of these things are embodied beliefs. They don't even reach our brain. We react in our body, and we're off. And that's why part of what we're going to talk about tonight is starting to hear and feel what's going on inside of us, okay? And the good news is that we counter what is the wrong belief by having a source of truth that is credible enough to believe and powerful enough to overcome the basis of the lie. And so we're going to be looking for those things as we go along. It's a credible source. It corrects the awful lie that we believe about ourselves and authoritatively shares the truth with us. It's a moving experience when we feel that. When we realize the truth, it's an aha. It's liberating, and it's exhilarating. Now, if those of you watching online here don't have the notes, you can write me, Ron, at empowerministry.org. That's Ron at empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send you the notes. In fact, if you sign up for the email, you'll get the notes, and you can follow along with us. Well, on the bottom of page 1, and I checked tonight, the pages are numbered correctly, or should I say page 6, like last week. But on page 1, on the bottom, what is emotional learning? Now, this is emotional learning, okay? If we're going to practice emotional relearning, then first we should learn what is an emotional learning. What is it? Well, there's 5 elements to an emotional learning. 1, somehow there's a trauma or a wound. Something happened that frightened us, something scary, something out of control, something happens. The trauma causes an emotional reaction or wound, leaving us as a child and even as an adult, and in adolescence even, bewildered. It can happen in a car accident. A lot of us go along thinking because of our faith in God that nothing bad will ever happen. But I know there's people right here that can testify bad things happen to good people, right? And they do. But that can really be an emotional learning that causes us to be fearful. All of a sudden we feel vulnerable. Well, we should have known that in the first. That our trust and faith should have been there, but we never experienced it, right? And it's a shock to experience that stuff. And so we have to emotionally then relearn to trust the Lord, don't we? And I know many of you that have gone through some things. I've watched you emotionally grab it and spiritually grab it and really learn the truth of God's provision, even in those horrible circumstances you've been going through. And so even as adults, we can get off this. But a lot of this happens as children when we don't have the logical brain online. And so it's a catastrophe. Have you ever seen a child when they get a little cut, not a big one, just a little one, there's like 1 drop of blood maybe if they squeeze it hard? Oh, they're crying, they're running around. They're thinking if they knew about 911, they'd be dialing it themselves, right? And they're just crying, horrible. And mom has to comfort them and everything. Well, that's the child's kind of alarm system, right? They're going to die. Now, they don't know any better. And the trouble is a lot of that stuff sticks with us. A lot of that sticks with us. People that have been traumatized by a dog early on take quite a while to overcome it. Some don't, right? They still have phobias of maybe about dogs, and other things like that. So emotional learning is a powerful thing. And a lot of times it happens when there's a wound. And so with this wound comes, number 2 there on the bottom of 1, an emotional belief. Now, this is a belief that's learned emotionally. The truth carried by the emotional weight of the alarming emotion triggered an amygdala reaction, that part of the limbic system, and it formed a memory of the event for future reference. And the belief is emotionally believed if it's not logical, right? Even if it's not logical, like the monster in the basement, right? I can't go to school. They're going to laugh at me. They don't love me. They don't like me there. I'm no good. Those are emotionally learned things that children learn a lot of times. And this belief is emotionally, even if it's not logic, and it's tied into a consequence. And we talked about some of that last week, and we'll kind of review it again, because here again, you're hearing this. I need you to take it home and kind of read it again, because we need to learn this. It's a process, okay? It's like any other skill, okay? So the 5 elements, the first one is a trauma or wound, then there's emotional belief, and then 3, on page 2 there's a perceived consequence. You see, believing something doesn't necessarily frighten me if there's no consequence to it. But there's a perceived consequence. If I'm not loved, if I've been told that I'm no good, I'm unwanted, well then, depending upon how old I am, that's a horrible situation. It can really be something that's fearful and traumatic to a child, especially. And a child doesn't quite understand. All they know is that they better do some corrective behavior. And so out of that sometimes comes people-pleasing. I knew I became quite a people pleaser. Don't get me in trouble, right? Don't be mad at me, don't, because the thought of that and even still, I can get into that. These things sometimes have. Now, can I rebound quicker? That's why this is called emotional resilience, not no emotion. We have emotions, okay? But we want to bounce back from them. And the good news is, and many of you have told me this, it's quicker and quicker and quicker, and sometimes doesn't happen at all. But some of these have been in there a long time. And as we practice it more, we'll change these things. And so there's a perceived consequence. For example, if I was verbally abused, I might tie the trauma into a self-belief that I'm worthless. And what do we do with worthless things? Well, we abandon them. And if I'm abandoned as a child, they can't even think of the terror. It's death, but they don't even think in those terms. They think in annihilation. They can't do it. They can't go there. Their brain won't let them go there. They panic. The alarm is set on, okay? And so that grows with us if we don't change it. And so what happens in number 4 here, and this is important, okay? And this is the root of a lot of chronic diseases, chronic anxiety, chronic fatigue. A lot of these chronic things is because of number 4 here, and that is an overactivation of the limbic system, of the amygdala. I say here, limbic system, amygdala, overprotection. It's set out to protect us, but then it's overprotecting us. And that alarm is coming on, and for example, chronic pain. Acute pain takes up about 5% of the neuronal territory in different areas of the brain. But once it becomes more chronic, it takes up about 25% of those areas. And now the pain is a memory, and it's coming from the brain into the body. It's not coming from the body up. And part of it's because the amygdala is overprotecting. Chemical sensitivity, a lot of these things are an overprotection, overactivation of the limbic system. And the good news is there's some hope there, because we know how to train the amygdala and bring it back. It's not easy. It takes time, but we can do it. And that's what this is. Emotional relearning is basically calming the emotions down where we can get that amygdala to start realizing this is not a dangerous situation, okay? And that's why danger is going to be a key word tonight, because I want you to track this week how many times you feel something's dangerous, something's off, something's, not maybe, there's a scale to danger, right? But there's something you're apprehensive, you're thinking, you're like this. Well, those are danger signals. You don't sit there and evaluate, well, this is more dangerous than that. And it's a signal. It's like one signal fits all kind of thing. And it keeps us in this hypervigilance. And many of us don't know, and that's why I'm asking you to track it, because it's our norm. My system was on all the time. It was my norm. I'd come into a meeting wondering, okay, is it going to go okay? Am I going to make it out of here? It's just like there was a predator in the room, right? Just kind of, looking around, am I going to be okay? Are they talking about me? And all that kind of paranoia, you might say, right? And that's because of some of these things. And so I want you to kind of watch yourself and see if you're doing some of that. Here again, and I'll say it quite a few times, do it without judging. This is another key, because when you do it judging yourself, it's another danger signal. We're not judging you here. This is not a judgment. This is not condemnation. It's an is. We want to see if we're doing it without judgment. It's okay if I'm doing it. It's a thought. It's just a thought. It's a reaction. It's just a reaction. Just observe it, relax, don't judge it. We'll deal with it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Because a lot of times, God, I did it again. There goes another alarm, right? And so we're constantly tripping these alarms. Do you ever watch them do that mouse traps on the ping pong table? And they threw the ping pong ball in, and each mouse trap had a ping pong ball on it? That's sort of like what it is sometimes. They threw the first one in, and all of a sudden it went off, boom, 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 and all of them are throwing their ping pong balls everywhere. I guess I'm too old. You probably never saw that one. Okay, that was when they wound up the machines. But anyways, but it was a good illustration apparently. But that's what it's like sometimes. We throw in one danger signal, and then all of a sudden that pops up, and then the other one. Maybe I should say whack-a-moles. Maybe that makes more sense. But it just keeps popping up. And so it's an overprotection. It's an overprotection. Overprotection. What's that mean? Got to pull it back, okay? It's not just a good protection, it's overprotecting, okay? We need to get that, okay? And here's the key. When our anxiety, other emotions, or body sensations become chronic, it's due to an overactivation or protection of the limbic system, specifically the amygdala, okay? And then the fifth part is we go into coping strategy. It's to keep us from the consequences of that belief. We escape, we overcompensate, we isolate, many different things to avoid the belief from becoming a reality and the consequences being activated. And that's where your homework has to come in. What am I believing, and what are the consequences? What am I perceiving is the danger here? And we'll get into that a little bit more. And so, the example above, if I'm worthless, and I'll be abandoned and die. I will cope by being a people pleaser in order to prove my worth, or I could compensate by numbing myself with an addiction, right? Right? So, and the trouble is, once we start coping, it's harder and harder to see what's going on. It's harder and harder to see what's going on because we're busy coping. It's become our norm, okay? So, what is emotional relearning then? Okay, that's how we emotionally learn. How can we emotionally relearn? How do we disarm this amygdala overactivation? Well, we can do it through emotional relearning. We can relearn emotionally by teaching the brain that there's nothing to react to by being calm whenever the alarm happens. Now, that's one way. We're starting to teach the brain that, hey, here's a trigger, but my response isn't panic anymore. It's not danger anymore. So that's why we learned a lot of the regulation things, okay? The breathing and all that is very important. And the relaxation and the posture and the grounding, all that kind of says to our brain, maybe this isn't dangerous, right? I mean, if you had something that looked like a hot stove and you touched it, and you burned yourself, you don't want to touch that again. But if there's something else that looked like it and you touched it and you didn't get burned, you might think you were lucky. But if you did it again and again and again, pretty soon you're going to say, well, that's not a hot stove. That's something else. It's not dangerous. And so that's what we kind of learn here, okay? And so we teach the brain there's nothing to react to by being calm when an alarm happens. Doing it enough will recondition the brain toward the trigger. However, we haven't really changed the meaning of that earlier event. There are other triggers that are still active. A better way is to change our interpretation of whatever that bothered us, okay? And I'm going to give an example here in a little while. Whatever it was that caused these lies in the first place, we want to be able to change. We can reset memory core self-beliefs through the disaffirmation, okay, of the lies. Otherwise, we find out what the lies are and we start to see that they're not true. You can almost tell me any of the things that you believe negative about yourself, and the chances are they're not true. But they feel so true. Chronic pain is pain. It is pain. It feels like pain. It is pain. But the source is coming from somewhere else, and it's the same thing here. And so it's, we need to disaffirm it, and we need to believe the new truth emotionally. And so we relook at the memory as a mature adult now. Remember, when many of these things happened, we were younger. And so now we can go back and look at some of those things as we think of them and change the interpretation. Yes, that happened. Yes, they yelled at me. Yes, they said that. But as an adult now, I can make a different choice. I can see that maybe they had a bad day. Maybe Dad was drunk. Maybe, but whatever it is, I don't have to believe it. It's not about me. Perhaps it was about them. And so I can start to say, okay, I have a choice to make today. Am I going to believe that just because something happened that long ago and I've believed it all this time, or am I going to really believe something else? I'm going to look at the evidence. What does God say? What did some of, the other people that I maybe talk to or think about say? And I'm going to weigh it, and I'm going to say, okay, this is what I choose to believe. And I'm going to substantiate that by really emotionally believing that, and we'll talk more about how that works. Well, here's a brief, on the bottom of 2 here, outline for emotional relearning. Number 1, we get in touch with our emotions. When we're feeling a certain emotion, we ask ourselves, okay, what am I believing about myself? And that just doesn't answer real quick. So used to Googling it, right? What's the capital of, California or something, it pops right up. Well, a lot of times when we ask this question, it isn't just going to pop up. We need to be still sometimes. We need to be quiet. We need to really ask ourselves, and that's why I like sometimes to write it out, because then I can come back to it later. Sometimes the question itself, finding out what the belief is an epiphany. And to try to analyze it right then doesn't always work. I don't have time. It just came to me. Chew on that. Start chewing on it. Start acting like a defense lawyer, okay? So that's what they're accusing me of. All right, how am I going to dismantle that? How am I going to prove my innocence, right? And so we start looking at this like a lawyer would, and we start saying, I got to get some evidence here. Are there credible witnesses? Is there circumstances before that substantiate a different theory? You see? So that's not just going to happen real quick, but it will happen if we make that our goal. So when we discover some of these things, like, man, I just thought of that this week. I really do feel that I'm worthless. I really feel worthless. It's okay. You don't have to be afraid of that. Don't have to believe it, but you are, so write it down. Now, we can, as we go along, emotionally relearn what the truth is. I can already tell you the answer to that. You aren't worthless. You aren't. God confirms that. there are plenty of people that would probably confirm that, but that doesn't help you to know that right away. That has to come through deliberate thinking about it and insight, and as we go, and the truth will set you free. And so the question is, the lawyer doesn't go in there and say, well, the lawyer says, I got to prove that that person isn't worthless. They are worth something. They have worth. That's their goal. And that's our goal once we start to discover what the lie is, what the self-belief is. Does that make sense? Okay? So this week, try to catch some of those things. When you're down, when you're thinking, when you're depressed, when you're angry, what am I believing, right? And that's what number 2 is. Number 1, get in touch with your emotions. 2, ask yourself, what am I believing about myself or others or life? I mean, it could be like life is no good. Life never works out for me. Life, it could be about that. Then 3, restate the emotional belief and rate how much you feel it's true. And that, sometimes that helps you understand, I really kind of do buy into this. And then, like I said, you can call in witnesses, number 4, that contradict it. It could be God, could be your older, mature self, right, versus the child that originally thought that in you. A friend, a relative that loves me, a counselor. There's a lot of places you can get truth. And then, 5, restate the truth in light of the witnesses. Write it down. And 6, ask yourself how much you believe it. Do you feel it's true? Because just because you think of it doesn't mean you're going to think it's true. You may need to work on that and chew on that. Okay, that's a new concept, and you might not believe it. And then 7 is relook at the original statement and ask you how much you believe it now. And hopefully you're getting closer and closer, because many of these things we don't have a hook for. And we've got to really start thinking about it. If you feel that you're really kind of not worth that much, then it's going to take a while for you to, where do you get that from? How are you going to prove that you're worth something? I can say it, but how are you going to believe it? And that's where this process comes in. And the good news is we can get there because it is true. So the emotionally relearning the truth of how wonderful you are, and I'm on the top of page 3 here, really are, despite your past and false beliefs will set you free. But for many of us, we stay stuck in the past, hanging on to false beliefs that were created by us when we were younger. It's no different than believing in the proverbial monster in the basement. And I hope you're starting to see that. I hope that you'll really start to discover what are some of these things, okay? Well, when do we say stuck in the past, okay? I mean, we're in the past, we're thinking of these things. Well, one, when we don't know we're stuck. We don't know we're stuck, right? When gut feelings, elevated emotions, bad attitudes seem to come out of nowhere, our implicit memory negatively motivates us, and we don't even know why it's happening. We're victim of mood swings, and negative emotions seem to be part of our nature, and we're used to it. It's our norm. So we don't even stop thinking. Instead, we go right into coping. We go right into coping, not thinking that there's something wrong. I mean, we know it, but we're not paying attention to it. Maybe we feel helpless. Maybe we feel what's the use and we don't want to try to tackle it. But for whatever reason, we're not being deliberate in saying, okay, I got to change. Something has to change here. It's been decades. It's been years. Something has to change, and it can. It can. And so to overcome, we need to notice things, right? And here again, we notice it without judgment or fear. And that's key, okay? If we're critical of ourselves, all that does is add to the stress. All it does is keep our amygdala going. And so some of these things, you want to notice that you're having them. For example, overbearing pressure, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks, you're dissociating, you have panic. Now, you see some of these things, you say, oh, there's something wrong with it. Whoa, calm down. Don't judge. Don't judge yourself. You're not broken. You're having these things, okay? It doesn't define you. We want to start paying attention. We want to start paying attention. The trouble is we go right into coping. And we start feeling negative about ourselves, and we start beating ourselves up, or we go into fear. Instead, we want to kind of look and say, well, gee, this sadness, or, I was really feeling shameful today, and I didn't even stop to think about that. Or, man, I really got angry, and, I just blew it off, didn't really worry about it, didn't think about it. But, gee, maybe I ought to think about that a little bit. No judgment, just I need to be aware. And, and so, strong negative feelings about ourselves, hypervigilance, nervousness, crying spells, things that we just have taken for granted. We can change these things, but we need to notice them. We need to notice them, okay? Because otherwise we're going to stay stuck in them. We just need to know that it's happening. Recognize it. Don't judge ourselves. Just recognize. Then, two, we get stuck in the past when we run from these things by avoiding or medicating, over-emoting, or keeping busy, or ignoring them, staying in denial. And that's what keeps us there a lot of times. And I call them escapes. A lot of times we, just keep doing things to keep us numb or keep us busy. I was a workaholic. Why? Where I wouldn't have to stop and think about how self-loathing I was. When I come home at night and everything shuts down, woo, the depression set in or the anxiety set in. So, man, I'd work till 2 in the morning, until I'd get tired and go to bed. Anything but being alone. A lot of people like me were no good on vacations. Last thing I wanted is a vacation where I couldn't fill my schedule and sit around and think about my anxiety all the time, And it's just this vicious cycle. And when I started to realize some of that, I was able to start saying, okay, what's going on here? And there's all kinds of escapes. And look at the next one on page 4 there. To overcome this, you need to notice without judgment or fear. When I tell you about my issues, I've sat up here and told, I'm not too worried that you're judging me. Okay, now some of you may be, and that's okay, but most of us, we're in a similar boat here, right? And so, I don't expect that you're necessarily judging me. Well, I need to be that way with myself. And you need to be that way with yourself. It's okay to own some of these things. There's no shame here, okay? And so what we need to notice without judgment or fear when we're escaping or avoiding what? Our thoughts, certain memories, certain people, places, events, conversations, certain responsibilities. When we're avoiding, we need to stop and circle it. Say, okay, I'm avoiding something. What's going on? Okay, hint number 2, okay? 3, when you don't get in touch with the implicit memories that are triggering them, what's behind this? And that's, why is this happening? And that's what we're going to spend some time on, trying to figure out how we can get in touch with some of these things, because they're out of our awareness. But the good news is we can bring part of it into our awareness and start working on it. And so we need to overcome that when we notice without judgment or fear that we have an inability, for example, to experience joy, or to think positive thoughts, or to concentrate, or relax. And so we need to start thinking, okay, how did I relax today? Was I joyful? Was I, thinking good thoughts? Am I reacting to something? And so we need to start doing that, okay? And what we want to start doing is making peace with the past. And I like this quote Linda Graham has in her book, Bouncing Back. It's on the bottom of 4. Self-empathy entails understanding what is happening within ourselves, what has happened in the past, and how it is affecting us now, or how something affected us in the past. It also entails understanding who we sense ourselves to be now, or who we have believed ourselves to be in the past. In order to mature toward well-being, our current self must understand and be accepting of all the earlier parts of the self that were conditioned by previous experiences. True understanding and compassionate self-acceptance are especially necessary when there are parts of ourselves that are still caught in negative stories about what happened to us, parts that still feel invisible, misunderstood, not accepted, or a failure. When we or others relate to these wounded parts of ourselves with empathy, that empathy makes it safe to allow any residual emotional pain connected with them to arise. We can stay connected with our experience in the moment. which is what will allow us to rewire any less than resilient strategies that develop from our wounding. You may want to read that again when you get back. I mean, I quoted that because she's saying exactly what we've been teaching here. And so we need to have somewhat of an awareness, okay, of what's going on in here, what's been going on in our lives. And we need to see it, making sense that we choose not to be damaged goods, no good, unworthy of love, or any other negative mental model of ourselves we have taken on. Making sense of the past helps us to choose that. And the thing is, when we finally see some of these negative things we believe, we can throw them away. We can come to God and see the way He created us. We can see ourselves through His eyes and emotionally relearn who we really are. God loves you. He knows who you are. He believes far greater things about you than you do about yourself. And we need to tap into that. We need to begin to celebrate it, because no matter what we went through in the past, we don't live there anymore. We don't live there anymore. We can accept that it happened, forgive it, and move on. And Daniel Siegel talks about that. He says that a deeper self-understanding changes who you are. Making sense of your life enables you to understand others more fully and gives you the possibility of choosing your behaviors and opening your mind to a fuller range of experiences. Our life stories can evolve as we grow throughout the lifespan. The capacity to integrate the past, present, and future allows us to move into more reasoned levels of self-knowledge. And so changing attachment or the way we relate to other people as we develop is quite possible. Studies have shown that individuals can move what we call as an insecure attachment to a secure one. And these changes are carried out through our relationship that heal wounds and transform defensive approaches to intimacy. And so he's saying similar things. Now, on your table is another thing called emotional relearning jogging, memory jogger, journal jogger. Okay, if you can look at that real quick, and we'll just take a minute to go through that. I want you to kind of look at this week. What happens here is a lot of times we're not aware of what went on in the past so much. A lot of the things happened. The cortisol was pumping, so the hippocampus didn't quite assemble it the way it is. But if we're purposeful, sometimes we can trigger up memories and write them down. And so what I've done here is that I've taken fear and I've put it into 3 levels. If you look at the first page there, level 1 is tenseness, uneasiness, and apprehension. And the reason I did this is that a lot of times if we're fear-based and I say, think of a time when you were terrorized, you aren't going to do it. Who wants to do that? But you can start slowly, right? You can start thinking, well, was there any time when I was tense or uneasy or apprehensive? That's not so scary to get in touch with that. And once we do that, we're kind of inoculated a little bit. We can go on to level 2. Can I think of a time when I was alarmed or worried or had some dread? And then level 3 is, was there some time when I was really shocked or panicked or helpless? And what I've done here is each level has the same thing you're going to look at. I want you to start with childhood. And I got a prayer before each one that you can pray and say, Lord, just help me. It's a safe place. You're not doing yourself any harm. You're just thinking. You're observing your life. You're above your life looking down. It's like a long line here, a timeline, and you're just kind of looking from a height of 1,000 feet down there to just see if there was anything. You're observing your past. You're not reliving it, okay? And there's a big difference there. And so what you want to do is think of situations with those special people. And when you're young in childhood, it's mainly your mother, father, and siblings, right? And so then I ask, can you think of any time during your early childhood where you experienced tenseness, uneasy, apprehension? So I put in the words that are in level 1. And then I ask you, think of junior high. And I listed some of the people. So what this does, it takes a few minutes to do it, but it allows you to think of, and you just, if you think of something, just write it down. Don't have to dwell on it. Just write it down. Keep it in your memory, because there might be something there that taught us something about ourselves that we need to emotionally relearn. And what's so cool is when we can go back to an experience that taught us something emotionally, and I'll give an example here in a minute, when we can go back there as an adult and say, well, I don't know why they said that, but it's not true. Or we hear from God that he says it's not true. Well, that's an aha moment. That's an emotional relearning, because we went back to one of the early examples and we exposed it. You know? It's sort of like, when you had something all your life you felt was wrong, and then all of a sudden someone came and said, well, no, they weren't talking about you. They didn't say that. They were talking about something else. And all the while, all your life, you've been thinking that person said something horrible about you. Well, and that, defined your life. And all of a sudden they said it's not true. It's just like pulling a sliver out, a big sliver out. Oh, you got to be kidding me. And that's what we want to get. We want to have that kind of, yeah, you're kidding me. You mean I really am this? And so that's what happens. So, and here again, you just do it slow. You've got, all week to do it in. Because I'd like you to have at least think about it, because when we come back next week, but you might want to take time, a long time to do it. But then go through the next one, fear level number 2. But what you might find is that there were some defining moments. Now, people in chronic pain have done this, and a lot of times chronic pain is because of this constant stress. And what they found out, just doing this, a lot of times exposing and realizing it happens, that alone takes care of a lot of the stress. All of a sudden it came in our awareness, and we start making the connections without even thinking about it. And our body starts to relax, because it's been hidden in the dark. It's been that nagging thing behind us that it's in the dark and it's not been exposed. And when you start as an adult looking back at some of the childish things that went on, or in your childhood, your mind starts, that'd be like being afraid that you're going to get beat up because a 6-year-old beat you up when you were 5. Now, I'm not going to worry about too many 6-year-olds coming up and kicking me in the shins. It's not going to bother me. I'll go, get away, kid, whatever. I'm not worried about a 5-year-old, right? And that's kind of thing. A lot of these things happen, and we can today look at them through the adult eyes. And so it really gets experienced. So when we start to see some of the things that are going on, and let's go on the bottom of 5 here, we see some of their irrational beliefs and disaffirming reasons and confirmations, right? We need to approach our felt beliefs with visualization of credible testimony. So once we start finding out what the lies are, we start finding out, okay, is there anyone that can help me disaffirm this? Visualize of living out the truth. Oh, here's the new truth. Can I really feel that? A more complete ending to a memory. A lot of these things that happen early on, the story's different today. 20, 30, 40 years have gone by. We're totally different. We have more power today. We know how to handle those kind of situations today. We're still reacting as if we were helpless, but we're not helpless today. We're not helpless today. And so that helps. And so as we learn it, the thing we do is that, we relive it, pre-live it, we visualize our story. So we'll talk more about that next week as we really kind of go through the process. So let's look at page 6, okay? Just to give you a clue here now, how do we know when we're being triggered, okay? If we're going to break out of the vicious cycle, we need to become aware of when we're being triggered so we can change it before we habitually keep reacting, right? That's that emotional recognition that we talk about. How are we going to start recognizing when things are happening where we can change them? Because if all we do is keep reacting to things, and then later on we're going, why did I do that? Wouldn't it be nice if we could catch it in the beginning? And so here's some of the things that can trigger us. And you might ask yourself, do any of these things really kind of work on me? Have these things been happening? For example, looks of disgust, rejection, sadness, anger, or hurt, let down expectations, someone's angry body language, a negative tone of voice, abandonment language or behavior. I remember early on, my wife and I were working on things, and anything that sounded like she was going to give up on me or do something like abandon me, oh, that would, I'd get angry. If you want, if you want to leave, leave. I'm not gonna sit around and wait for abandonment. I had real abandonment issues. It just, and it came out of things that happened in my childhood. But I realized my wife wasn't that way. My wife wasn't that way, and she stuck with me all these years, right? And I had to learn that no, she wasn't. Now, it didn't give me an excuse to act out ignorantly, right, and do things that would make her upset, right? But the good news is I didn't have to worry. I mean, she had every right to tell me things. I didn't have to extrapolate from that she was going to abandon me. But that was, my radar was on. My radar was on. A lot of times, perceived disappointment or someone being disapproved of us. Blank stare. Now, that one, there's a whole experiment they do with children called still face, where they can kind of tell how a child's going to react, and it's a mom's playing with a kid, then on a signal, all of a sudden they go, and the baby just, after a few seconds, hi, pulls on mom, makes a joke, kinds of, and pretty soon, after about 30, 40 seconds, it starts crying. It's very uncomfortable because mom is not feeding back. Well, most of the memories I have of my mother were, she was depressed a lot. I mean, and so I became quite the joker. I was like that little child. Hey, mom, hey, and doing things where my mom wouldn't get into a depression or get sad or do the still face, silent treatment, all those kind of things. And so, our reactions sometimes, that would be a trigger for me. I read faces. If you know me and been around me and you start feeling it, pretty soon I'll go, what's wrong? What is something wrong? Because I may be reading it wrong, but I'm sensitive to that. So what kind of things are, because here's the thing. If you can see what's triggering, you can say, okay, what am I believing when that happens? Why is that bothering? What's going on? You see how you're getting a little bit more of the picture? You want to come up with a little picture of what's bothering you, where we can get to, what am I really believing about myself? Where I can change it and know the truth, okay? Now, another way is to recognize some of the symptoms, okay? It may be some of the triggers. Look on page 7 here. Okay, it's natural to react to a fear-based alarm with hypervigilance, like worry, but it doesn't solve the problem. As we react to triggers, we need to pause and tune into what's going on. We need to ask ourselves on the top of 7, why is this happening? Why is it happening now? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Why this is going on? You can circle that, okay? That's kind of some of the tools you'll use to get to this, okay? What am I believing about myself? And that's where this emotional recognition, we can learn to become aware of these cues or symptoms, okay? And retrace our steps. And we can then start to change our mind. And so we ask ourselves, what just happened? How did I react? How am I feeling emotionally? Did I feel validated, respected, heard, loved? Am I holding anger or frustration? See, some of these things, and each one of us are different, but what's cluing here to you? And so let's look at some of the symptoms. Emotionally, some of the symptoms that you might be looking at is sadness or bitterness, worry, anger, being weepy, fearful, feeling numb, unmotivated, discouraged. Now, everyone has some of these sometimes, but if this is a pattern, if you're feeling this a lot, then you might want to ask yourself, okay, what's going on? Being agitated, pessimistic, and a lot of times you'll be surprised what you're thinking about. Somewhere there's a danger signal going off. Somewhere something's going on here. Restlessness, racing thoughts, moodiness, inability to relax. You can see on top of 8 there. Cravings, all kinds of things here. So you can kind of go through that. The physical ones that might let us know that something is going on And you can ask yourself, and if some of these you have, then let's start being a detective here, okay? Start building the case, okay? Physical, chronic pain, upset stomach, headaches all the time, fibromyalgia sometimes, stomach problems, flushed cheeks, being lethargic, holding our breath or shallow breathing, clenched fists, tension in the neck and shoulders. There's all kinds of things. Tension in the face, butterflies in the stomach, cravings, right? Wanting to escape through drugs or drinking, that kind of stuff, tightness in the chest, sleep issues, all kinds of things here. And so it's here again, you look at these things without judgment. We're not here to judge, okay? This isn't a, boy, are you horrible, okay? Please get that out of your head. It's an is, okay? We can't correct something. We got here because of some reason. There's nothing to be shamed here, but we're not going to correct it if we don't start noticing, okay? And as you notice this in yourself, you'll be surprised. We aren't the only ones that worry about anxiety, right? We're going to be able to help a lot of other people. So don't just do this for yourself. Do this where you can learn these things, and we can pass this stuff on. Now, socially, there's some things you can look at, too. Am I withdrawn? Am I people-pleasing? Am I, not wanting to go out and meet people? Am I being overly aggressive? Am I constantly in trouble with people? Am I eating more or eating less? Am I procrastinating all the time? Am I chronically late? I mean, are there things that might be giving a clue that socially things are going on? I'm worried. I'm full of fear. I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing. Here again, without judgment, just, okay, I'm observing. And then what we want to do is, on page 9 here, zero in on the thinking. And part of the emotional relearning is to learn a new emotional vocabulary. We can hear it in our stories. We think of all kinds of thoughts, and usually it results in an issue of safety. Something has caused the limbic system to react. And there's usually 3 types of thoughts, and circle this one on the top of page 9, okay? Danger thoughts or imagery, right? A lot of times it's not a thought, we're seeing something, danger. 2, stressful. Stress will kick these things off. Am I pressured? Is there a lot of pressure at work? Am I pressured in life? Are things falling apart? Have I got too much on my plate? Whether I'm doing it to myself or others are doing it, am I stressful? That causes a lot of these. And then is there critical thoughts? Maybe other people criticizing me or my own self-critical thoughts, but is criticism in my life a lot? Is there toxic relationships going on? All these things cause us to stay in this constant anxiety circle, this chronic feeling. And so if we can start getting in touch with some of those things, we can start to analyze them. And here's some of the phrases that are insinuating danger or make us stressful or result in a negative perception, okay? I'm no good, I'm defective, I'm unwanted. Not 3 is something wrong, there is something wrong. I'm inferior, they're mad at me, I'm going to fail at this. You can look at that list and circle some of the ones that is somewhat common with yourself. Here again, you're just observing. You're just observing. You're not condemning yourself here. We're here to correct these things, okay? We're here to correct these things. I will lose control. Something is wrong. I can't. They won't. No good. And now it may be an action type belief if you look on 10. I got to get out of here. That's an anxiety signal, right? I must avoid criticism and or rejection. I'll do anything. I'll please anyone. Please don't like me, right? I'm going to be exposed. I must make everyone happy. I must be careful because they'll hurt me. I mean, these are more action-oriented, but these kind of statements too. Are some of these in your life? And then it may be translated as an adult now. Maybe some of those were early on and we still hang on, but maybe now we're thinking I'm unable to handle everyday pressure. Or catastrophe is going to happen any moment and I can't prevent it. Or I'm cursed. Or if they only knew the real me. There's something wrong with me. I must sacrifice my own social and personal interests to please others. And so you can look at some of those, okay? And then what we went through before, and you can kind of read this on your own too, is that there's consequences to that. Yeah, I mean, if I'm defective, then what? Defective things are disposed of. And if I'm unwanted, then what? Well, unwanted things are discarded. And if I'm going to be exposed, if I'm exposed, I'll be found out. No one will like me. You see, that's what's scaring us. I mean, if we had nothing to hide, why would we fear being exposed, right? You know, but if there's something I feel is incredibly wrong with me, then I don't want you finding it out. When I was so shame-based, the last thing I wanted to do was go to a counselor and have that counselor agree with me. There's something really wrong with you, Ron. I didn't need anyone else to prove that to me, right? I already felt that. And so I stayed away from it. And it took me a lot longer to get well, okay? Well, then there's an inevitable result of that. And look on the bottom of 10. If I'm defective, then what? Defective things are disposed of. And if I'm disposed, I will die. I mean, that's where the real danger's coming. It doesn't make logic sense, but that's what happens. Those are emotional beliefs from early on. If I'm unwanted, then what? Unwanted things are discarded. If I'm discarded, I'll become a non-being. Or if I'm going to be exposed, I'll be found out. No one will like me. If no one likes me, I'll be unprotected and annihilated. Now, to say those conclusions sound ridiculous, but that's the reaction we're giving. If we judge it by the reaction we have of this fear and anxiety, then that makes sense. But the good news is, it's not true. And that's why a lot of times I cut to the chase and tell people to, when they're really starting to feel it, just say, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die because this is going on. And when we can get to that place and start calming down that alarm, then we can do it, okay? And so in review, we can ask ourselves, what emotional, physical, or social symptoms am I experiencing? What thoughts or imagery went through my mind? What am I believing about myself right now? What consequences do I believe are imminent? What would be the inevitable negative result of the consequence? And as we write down these things, next week we're going to continue. Now, we talked about emotional regulation before. There's all kinds of things we can do, but next week we want to talk about emotional relearning, and so we'll continue. I'll have these notes here along with next week's notes. We'll continue with it. Tonight we've kind of went over, I think, enough. I want you to kind of take this home and start asking yourself, okay, are there some clues here? And are there some things that I'm thinking? And the good news, we can start to regulate our emotions when they come up, but what we want to do is start changing our thinking. And next week, we're going to dig into more about how we really can change it, okay? Let's finish with an example on page 12. A father yelling at a child in rage. What's wrong with you? We're at the bottom of 12. You're no good. I wish you had never been born. Well, that declaration of you're no good is given in anger from the one who's supposed to protect you. In a sense, that's abuse, right? Very confusing to the child. Then there's an emotional threat. I wish you were never born. I mean, that's abandonment. That's a dismissal of the child as a person. And just imagine how terrified a child would be in there. The people that are supposed to protect them. And I wish this didn't happen, but it happens, okay? Now, look at page 13. Because the father has the power and authority to do something horrible to the child would experience immense fright. The father's authority, tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, harsh words spoken would result in the child believing a lie, that there is something wrong with them. They are indeed no good. Because of the fright, this lie would be emotionally learned. The experience would be traumatizing and tied into the amygdala-based alarm system. And that's learning emotionally, okay? Now, the good news is we can change that with a good source of truth. And that's where we'll quit tonight. And next time, if you want, go ahead and take a look at the 6 steps of emotional relearning. And we'll start there next week, and when we go over the next lesson, and we'll actually talk about how do we emotionally relearn. But first, try to take it home, do some of the stuff where you can start to learn, what do I need to emotionally relearn? Does that make sense? All right? All right, well, let's ask God to just help us with that, okay? Father, I thank you, Lord, that, Father, you know us, and you know some of the thoughts we have. And, Lord, I just pray now that you would help us this week, maybe get in touch with some of these things, maybe start seeing some of the way we're thinking or behaving or worrying or anxiety, that, Lord, we'll start to get insights, that we'll be able to know these things without judging ourselves, without fear, and just noticing that it is where we can come and we can really start to work on realizing what the truth is and to change. And we pray these things now in your name. Amen. Amen. So, thank you. So I encourage you to kind of take it home, look it over a little bit. It helps when we go through it again. We'll go through, that's why there's 2 lessons this. We'll kind of go at it again next week. But if we can start figuring out when we're being triggered, when some of this stuff's going on, we'll start to get some insight. I had two or three different people call me this week telling me about some of the things that they've been learning. They've been in our class in the past. They've been going through some of this stuff. And it's amazing what they know about themselves now, how they catch themselves saying a certain thing and saying, oh, hold it. I don't have to believe that. I know what the truth is. And it's amazing to me how we start to connect the dots as we start to learn these things. We don't have to be a victim anymore of the fears we've had and the thoughts. We can emotionally really start relearning. So that's my hope for each one of us, okay? So next week we'll continue this, finish it up, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll do the year-long class, and you're welcome to come to that. All right? Thank you. All right.